Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck, and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. And this week, having a little bit of an amp crisis.
She said that she don't believe it. I'm going home there. I'm going home. Yeah.
Now, frequent viewers of Friday Fretworks will know that I'm a big fan of the Fender Pro Reverb. It's the amp that you've just heard in that introduction. I've made a video on it relatively recently, which I shall link to above, and it's been on pretty much every Cardinal Black show that we've ever done. Or, come to think of it, it has been on every Cardinal Black show that we've ever done, from castles to small club gigs to the Shepherd's Bush Empire to the Royal Albert Hall last month. It's an amp that I'm particularly fond of and have zero qualms about throwing into any situation. For a small 1x12 combo, it's always carried a fair amount of low end, which gives it a real sense of size and gravitas and weight, irrespective of how big the stage. It's typically kind of Fender voice in that it does quite a lot of that treble, kind of crystalline, Fendery kind of top end thing, but as you would expect, is also slightly mid-scooped, which is why, kind of say for one or two gigs, I've always paired it with the Victory Copper Deluxe. Vox AC30 based, unashamedly so, and very much strident and barky and angry and shouty in that mid-range, and the two together have always worked beautifully. The idea behind having two amps on stage isn't to simply make myself louder. If anything, having two amps that work in a complementary way of each other can actually allow you to come down in terms of volume on stage because you're filling in all of those missing frequencies. And that's always been the plan with those two amps. It's a combination that I've always been very happy with. That is, until the last tour that we did with Peter Frampton last month. Maybe it was just the cavernous size of the venues, maybe it was the literal size of the stages that we were playing on, and the subtleties getting lost, but there were definitely moments where I found myself wishing that I had more presence on stage, in the literal sense of brightness, not wanting to wear a cool hat to try and stand out or something. And as such, I would find myself going over to the Pro Reverb mid-set and trying to dial in a little bit more clarity. Invariably involves trying to dial in a little bit more treble. Give it a couple of minutes, I'd be working my way back over to the Pro Reverb to dial that treble back out, with things having started sounding a little bit bright or a little bit brittle. And as such, it got me thinking, kind of, where am I going wrong? It was only when listening back to the isolated stems, the isolated guitar tracks in particular, from the Royal Albert Hall show, that I found myself thinking that the two amps don't actually sound quite as different as I was expecting. There's a fair amount of mid-range in the Pro Reverb, and that top-end kind of treble responsiveness doesn't seem to necessarily translate to microphone in quite the way I was expecting. Now, this next clip that you're going to hear is of a track called Warm Love, the solo from that track, first taken from out front, so you can hear the kind of front of house mix from the camera phone that it was shot on. Camera phone, that's very 90s, isn't it? And then you're going to be hearing the isolated guitar tracks alternating between the Pro Reverb and the Victory Copper Deluxe, just to give you a sense of where things are sitting. Now, a few weeks back, I was doing a masterclass at the Glasgow guitar show with Yamaha when I stumbled across an amp for sale that, if I'm entirely honest, didn't know existed. That is a 68 custom Vibrolux Reverb reissue. It's a bit of a mouthful. As I said, I wasn't really aware of this amp, but as far as I can ascertain, it was released in 2014 and discontinued a year or so ago, no doubt in response to either dwindling sales or the introduction of the later 68 customs, ironically, the Pro Reverb being one of them. Now, the first thing that really impressed me about the Vibrolux was that treble responsiveness that I've kind of spoken about earlier, which seems to be lacking in the Pro Reverb. The Vibrolux seems to have that in spades, and whether that's as a consequence of its voicing or its circuitry or even the two 10-inch speakers as opposed to the single 12 in the Pro Reverb, I'm not entirely sure, but I was convinced enough to go away, do a little bit of hunting on Reverb and eBay, and take a punt on one. Turns out the one that I bought had actually had the speakers upgraded as well to Jensen P10 RFs, which was a nice little unexpected surprise. But suffice to say, thus far, I'm incredibly impressed with it. Caveat, without actually having had a chance to put it through its paces in a live context. This weekend, actually coming up on Saturday, will be the first show that we've done in the UK since I bought this amp, and as such will be the first chance I really get to put it through its paces in that scenario. But I thought it would be interesting today to do a little bit of a comparison between the Pro Reverb and the Vibrolux to give you an idea of how they sound back to back. Now, these next clips are going to be running through the Universal Audio aux box just for consistency's sake. I'll be intrigued to see what you guys make of that, so please do let me know in the comments. But I think my knee-jerk reaction is an interesting one in that I don't think I actually like the sound of the Vibrolux as much as I do the Pro Reverb. Maybe that's just because I'm so used to the sound of the Pro Reverb, but in isolation I think there's a mid-range in the Pro Reverb which is particularly pleasing, but that mid-range may also be the thing that's kind of causing the problem in a live context. The Vibrolux is undoubtedly more scooped in the mid-range and definitely has a little bit more of that kind of top-end treble responsiveness that I was referring to, which I think, ironically, even though it doesn't sound as nice to me, at least in isolation, will probably pair better with the Copper Deluxe. I guess we'll find out on the weekend. I'm going to try and get a bit of footage from that show, circle back in a few weeks to let you guys know my findings. Of course, the other amp that's been on my radar for a little while now, and one that no doubt frequent viewers of Friday Fretworks are wondering why I haven't thrown into the mix yet, is the Deluxe Reverb. A few weeks back, I took a trip up to Fender's Artist HQ in Covent Garden, have a little bit of a shootout between an original 65 Deluxe Reverb alongside the standard 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue, alongside the 64 custom hand-wired reissue. Now, I've actually had a chance to put a few original Deluxe Reverbs through their paces since I shot that video, notably a fortnight or so ago in the Burst video that I did, where you can hear me playing a 1960 Les Paul through, again, a 65 Deluxe Reverb. I've also had a chance to put the reissues to their paces again since then, notably out in Switzerland last week at Guitar and Total in Zurich, absolutely phenomenal guitar shop if you're ever in that neck of the woods, where they had the standard 65 reissue and the 64 custom. Spent a little while going back and forth between the two, and to be honest, came to exactly the same conclusion. I much prefer the 65 reissue than the 64 hand-wired. There's a mid-range which is much closer to those original models in the 65 reissue that just categorically isn't there in the 64. There is a brightness and a little bit of kind of more top-end responsiveness in the 64 hand-wired that I guess isn't there in the 65. This is a lot of numbers, but as much as that may be kind of appealing, I guess, there's a brittleness and a sterile kind of quality to the 64, which I don't find particularly appealing. But I guess the underlying message of all this is that none of them, to my ear at the very least, have sounded as good as the originals. Again, that top-end articulation and clarity, without ever getting ice-picky, is just there in spades in those original models that I've played. All of this, of course, not helped by having access to these incredible amps, including, again, a beautiful 65 Deluxe Reverb out at Powerplay Studios in Mauer, Switzerland. This is the reason I was out in Zurich a few weeks ago. Honestly, again, an absolutely stunningly beautiful studio in a gorgeous location where we were doing a live-to-vinyl recording. And I can hear a clip from that session coming up next. Again, first you'll be hearing the phone audio just to give you a sense of context, but then you're going to be hearing it transition to the isolated recording taken from in front of the 65 Deluxe Reverb. You can hear that even though it's kind of fairly fuzzed out, kind of rounded tone, there's still that top end kind of clarity chiming through, which as of yet to find in the Deluxe Reverb reissues. So as I said, there's not really a great deal more I can say at this point, not without having put the amp through its paces in a live gig anyway. Got 2 shows on the weekend, 2 sold-out shows to finish the year, so I'll try and get a bit of footage of those gigs and circle back round to this topics in a few weeks. But I thought if nothing else, it would be a cool idea to get your guys' opinion on the sound of the Vibrolux versus the sound of the Pro Reverb. Obviously been a long-time user of the Pro Reverb and long espoused its benefits, so if I am planning on changing, I thought you guys would probably appreciate being the first ones to know. As ever, I'm Chris Buck. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon. I shall see you next week, just before Christmas, for another episode of Friday Fretworks. Cheers, guys. Take care. See you soon.